The Ruy Lopez. It is one of the oldest openings dating back to the 16th century. It is the e4, e5, and then the horsey out to the f3. After the horsey comes down to the c6, we then have the bishop coming across to the b5. Very, very famous opening. There are a lot of traps within this, so we are going to be looking at some of the more famous ones, looking at a few games throughout history, and just finding all of these traps where we can win a free queen, get a checkmate, or get a significant gain in material, because I would rather you learn from someone else's mistakes than learn from your own. So let's get into it. So just to quickly show you the main line before we move on to the traps, the a6 comes down just to kick the bishop out of the way, so we slide on back to the a4. After this, it's going to be the horsey to the f6. Now, sometimes you may just see the b5 come down, and if that's the case, then clearly we're just going to move to the b3 there. But for the main line, it is the horsey to the f6. White gets castled off, and bishop comes out to the e7. You may sometimes see the horsey come down and take, but we just push up the pawn, and then we are looking at trying to do this trade. And if they go for it, rook comes out, and that horsey is pinned there. But like I say, for the main line, it's going to be the bishop. Rook comes out just defending that pawn there, and then b5, bishop slides back, and then black gets castled off. And from here, normally for white, you'll be looking at something like the c3, with plans of doing the pawn break here onto the d4. That is the main line, but let's have a little look at some traps. Alright, so for the first trap, we will pick up on move 3. Black's horsey comes out to the f6, and we get castled off there, and we are allowing them to go and take that pawn. This is known as the Rio Gambit accepted. From here, we push forward the pawn to the d4, offering up the exchange there, and we then bring across our rook, looking at pinning the horsey to the king. Yes, we are 2 points of material down, but you can see we have a 0.5 advantage there. Now, from here, you're going to see the d5 coming down to try and defend the horsey there. And this is where we can just jump up with the queen and take that pawn. Now, clearly he can't take back with a horsey because of this pin here, so he comes down with the a6, looking at kicking us out of the way, but I encourage you to go ahead and offer up that trade, doubling up the pawns here. Now, this is where things get interesting. We hop up our horsey like so, and you can see that we are piling on pressure to this. Now, clearly he can't take back with the horsey because of the pin, can't take back with the queen because of the bishop there, and the most common move by far, according to the Lee Chess database, is this, the queen coming to the f6. Now, he's trying to threaten this, however, we can quite happily go ahead and take the horsey, and yes, it looks like we are just giving up our queen there, but we take the horsey, he goes ahead and takes what looks like a free queen, but look, we have this discovered check, and this is actually a mate in 2, so I'd like you to pause it, have a little look, see if you can find it. Gonna assume you did that. Horsey hops up to the f6, and we now have the double check. King only has one move, and that is the d8. Rook slides on up, and that is a checkmate. Now, they do have some other options instead. When we hop up like so, there is also the move f5. Now, we're not going to get the checkmate here, but what we can do is just push forward that pawn. Clearly, he can't hop out of the way because of the pin there, so he comes across with the queen. Offer up the trade like so, and then we can just quite happily hop back our horsey to here. And later on, we can quite easily just reroute it to something like the f4, but this horsey is about to fall. Alright, this is a checkmate taken from a game between Fuller in the white and Horton in the black. So we have the a6 comes down just to try and kick the bishop out of the way. Bishop shimmies back, and then the b5 comes down. So the bishop comes to what I think is a really favourable square on this b3, just controlling down this diagonal, pointing at this very weak f7 square there. So black continues on, and you can see they're pushing down the pawns, trying to apply more pressure to this bishop, but after the a4 and then the b4, things are pretty comfortable, and you can see by the analysis bar, slightly in white's favour there. So white smashes up with the d4 just to try and break open the centre, and black comes across, not wanting to take the exchange there, bringing out the bishop, just adding in the extra defender. But you can see analysis bar once again, huge mistake, because after the trade here, pawn takes, horsey takes back, and then the bishop takes back. White has this absolutely stunning move of the queen coming up to the d5, and black just resigns in this position because we have this battering ram threatening, like I say, this very weak f7 square there, threatening a mate in one, and if they try to block it with the queen, that's just a free rook. Alright, here we have a couple from black's perspective, the fishing pole trap, probably the most famous trap for black. For this, let me just turn on that analysis bar there. So we have the horsey out to the f6, white gets castled off, and then the horsey jumps up to the g4, threatening this pawn here. Well, the h3 comes down, which looks like a very natural move, and we push up the h5. Now the point of this is, after the exchange there, the rook has now been opened up, but also the queen is now out, and this pawn is threatening this horsey here. Things are looking pretty grim for black. After the horsey jumps out of the way, it is a mate in 4. Queen comes across there, teaming up like so, and like I say, it is game over for black. There's not much they can do. They can try pushing down the pawn, but after the g3 comes, blocking any kind of exit for white. White really should just resign, but let's just say the rook comes down to the f3, we come down, and that is a checkmate. And another slight variation on the fishing pole trap, let's just say the a6 comes up, and then bishop goes ahead and takes the horsey. Well, we capture back, opening up the queen there, and then after white gets castled off to safety, we come across with the bishop going for the pin there. Well, the pawn comes down to try and kick us out of the way. However, this time, the pawn up to the h5, he then goes ahead and takes, and it is once again potentially game over. Now, there are ways around this, something like the rook to the e1, and then while black's in a much better position there, it does stop the mate. However, for this, let's just say horsey comes down, takes what looks like a free pawn, now threatening this pawn, but that pawn was pure poison because queen comes across and it is now pretty much game over. Pawn comes down to try and give black a little bit of room, but once again we push forward the g3 and there is nothing that they can do to stop us. Alright, so this one is taken from an online game between two 2,500 players. We have the a6, bishop drops back, b5, and then the bishop comes down to the b3, very similar to before. Now the horsey comes down trying to threaten our bishop and hoping for the exchange. However, the bishop smashes across onto that weak f7 square there. King goes ahead and takes. Horsey clearly about to jump up and then put the king in check. And from here, it is absolutely brutal, just chasing the king around the board. King comes down to the e6 there, trying to threaten the horsey, but then the queen comes out to the g4, putting the king in check. King, thinking he's got a nice free horsey, then gets attacked once again with the f4 check. King then comes down, taking the e4, and look at that analysis bar there. Oh, horsey comes up, and that is checkmate. What's quite funny with this game, actually, if we just bring it back, prior to the king taking this, while things look absolutely terrible for black, Stockfish actually puts this at a huge advantage for black. There is ways for king to get out of the way. If the king was to just say, come back to the d6, then white gets castled off, the king can actually get to safety there. And black is, well, they have a 4-point material lead, but Stockfish puts it at a 4.9 advantage there. But I just thought this was an absolutely fantastic game to look at. And here we have a game between Bill Wall, the author of 700 opening traps in the white, and Lepine in the black. I feel like I said that wrong. So, just to play out the first few moves, very similar to before. The pawns come and they kick the bishop out of the way. Horsey comes out to the f6, and then Horsey develops to the c3. Now from here you can see once again they're pushing down the a5 just to try and exert pressure on both of these guys here. However, this is where Horsey jumps up to the g5, and you can see these guys just teaming up together, and this is very, very common within the Ruy Lopez. Well, the pawn comes down to try and kick the Horsey out of the way, but it is a huge mistake. Horsey jumps up and goes and forks the queen and the rook there. Queen moves out of the way, but then Horsey jumps across to, whoopsie daisy, here onto the b5, looking at forking the king and the rook. Things are looking absolutely grim for black there. Alright, so here we have a game between D'Agostino in the white and Apodaca in the black. I swear these are getting harder as I go along. So I'll just smash through the next few moves because we've seen it a few times now. So a6, bishop a4, b5, bishop to the b3. Horsey comes out to the f6, trying to apply a bit of pressure onto that central pawn, and we get castled off and let them go ahead and take the pawn. Now white makes a fantastic move here, hopping up the Horsey, sacrificing itself like so. Now this looks like a strange move, however, look at all the space on this side for the queen to just shimmy right across to the h5 there. Now, this is a risky move, you can see. Analysis bar does not like it. However, the plan here for D'Agostino is this, but also applying pressure onto the Horsey there. And black decides to come out with the bishop there to try and defend, but white has the brilliant move of pushing forwards the d4 pawn. Now, really, what black should be doing in this position is hopping across to the c4, blocking this. Then rook would come across to the e1, black would get castled off there, and it's a very even position there. However, instead, he decides to retreat back to here to the c6, thinking he's applying pressure to that pawn and completely missing the checkmate. Alright, this is taken from another game. We have Bellinger in the white and we have Boyce in the black there. So, a6, bishop swings back to the a4, then the Horsey develops out to the f6. White gets castled off and black goes and takes that pawn. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Well, from here we have the d4 coming up with that early pawn break to try and break open the centre. They decide to not go for it. Obviously, if they do, then things are going to get somewhat uncomfortable for them there. So they just leave it there, push down the pawn, and the bishop moves across to here. But now the bishop is targeting that f7 square. After the pawn goes ahead and decides to take at this point, Horsey jumps up to here, and obviously they are not going to go ahead and take, because after the queen to the d4, you can see things are really uncomfortable for black. We are a lot more developed. We are threatening to take the Horsey. We're threatening the rook coming across here. We're threatening to come here and team up against this. White has just a lot more options from here. So instead, he decides to bring across the Horsey to here, trying to attack the bishop. And while that looks like a normal developmental move, it is a terrible idea. White goes to do the exchange, Horsey now threatening the queen. Pawn takes back, but then the bishop, boom. Black just resigns in this position. Clearly, if the black were to take, that is just a free queen. If black decides to come to somewhere like the e7 instead, other bishop comes out, and that is just a free queen. Right, there are some fun traps within the Ruy Lopez and some real life games. If there's any openings you want to see me cover, let me know in the comments and I will try to cover it. You dudes go off, have some fun, play some chess, and I will catch you all later.